welcome to the Energy and Net Zero Select Committee. We're conducting a session on the energy sources that we will have to take us into the future, and we've got two witnesses for our first panel, and I'm wondering whether each of you might just introduce yourselves for the purposes of the record.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Keith Bell. I'm from the University of Strathclyde, and I'm a member of the Climate Change Committee, and I'm here this morning representing the Climate Change Committee.
So Craig Dyke, Director of System Operations at the Electricity System Operator, to become Future System Operator in July.
Right, thank you very much, gentlemen. You're very welcome. Thank you for being here. My first question is to Professor Bell, and there are a whole series of new technologies that are being spoken about both in this committee and more broadly about how we keep our electrical supply given the increased demands that arise from transport and from home heating and the decarbonisation of our industrial sector. So how do the various technologies stack up, and have we got enough options available to us at the moment?
I believe we do have enough options. The heavy lifting, if you like, will be done by renewables, by variable renewables dependent on the weather. So wind and solar, both onshore wind and offshore wind in particular. And the reason is that they are, on a simple levelized cost of energy basis, the cheapest new forms of energy. If you're building new plants to get new capacity, those are the cheapest ways of doing it. But of course, by their very nature, they are variable, so they need to be complemented by something else. And that something else, of course, also needs to be low carbon. And there are, as you suggest, a number of options. As we know, there's a nuclear power station is under construction. If we're going to use gas, we have to capture the CO2 emissions. If we're going to continue to use bioenergy at any kind of scale, and there's a limit to what that scale might be because of other uses of land, the competing uses, then really we should be capturing the CO2 from use of biomass as well. And then you go into the potential for us to import from neighbouring countries. We can export surpluses. And actually, the variability of wind and solar, there will be times as we scale up that capacity to get that just simply the amount of energy out, there will be times when the availability from wind and solar will exceed the demand at that moment. So we really should have some way of making use of that available energy without having to curtail it. We could export it to our neighbours, or we could use it to manufacture hydrogen using electrolysis. So hydrogen now becomes actually a really important potential means of moving energy through time, because then it's a source for when it's not windy or sunny.
You spoke about things that we could do. Is there a clear enough idea from your organisation and from government as to which road we should be going down? There are lots of things we could do. Which ones should we be doing?
I think that there is a need for clarity. I wouldn't say that the work that we published in March last year gives a prescription. That wasn't what we were trying to do. What we were trying to show was that a fully decarbonised power system by 2035 is entirely feasible. And based on the relative costs of the different options that were available to us at the time, we were able to suggest what the mix might be. So I would say that the kind of crucial thing is to make full use of wind and solar, recognising that some of it would be curtailed. So what's the kind of economic balance of curtailment? And a lot of that actually relates to the network, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But there's also a need for what we would call schedulable, or sometimes we might call it dispatchable sources of electrical energy. So something that you can be confident that it will produce at a certain time when it's not windy or sunny. Now, there are competing technologies in there for that. As I mentioned already, something with carbon capture and storage, something that uses low carbon hydrogen. And we need also enough that's flexible because of the demand going up and down and the wind and solar availability going up and down, things to kind of fill in the gaps. So I think the classes of types of resource are very clear, but there are some options within each class that will really depend on the economics and the market and how they get delivered.
Mr. Dyke, Professor Bell's told us about the sources of generation. Do you think that we've got a clear enough idea of which ones we're going to adopt and what the way forward is going to be?
I think so. If you look at our future energy scenarios, it talks about new nuclear power stations, it talks about gas-fired power stations with carbon and capture, it talks about gas turbines fired by hydrogen, it also talks about long-duration energy storage as well. And the thing is, you need the whole mix in order to make it secure in the future. because the element is you need renewables in order to drive down carbon, but you also need clean, non-weather dependent technologies as well to make up for the days where the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. So you need all of these things to come together. And all of the things to come together, you need several different factors to work. You need the right markets, you need the right market development that attracts investment and the right technologies. You need the right level of networks as well, so the right level of networks that meets the needs to get the power from source to where it's needed, but also is cognizant of community and local needs. And you also need the right resources as well, so it's not just about the technology, but remember this is a global market and all the world is actually competing for these technologies as well, so we also need to think about the whole supply chain in a lot of this.
And you both referred to nuclear. What proportion, how important is nuclear going to be in the mix? We understand the need for baseload, but how much should we have?
As it happens, I tend to avoid talking about baseload. Right. So the idea of baseload in the past was useful and important because the demand for electricity never went below a certain level. So you could depend on some source of electricity operating 24/7, just put it on, leave it there. I think now we should be thinking about the residual demand, so the difference at any moment in time between what the demand is and what's available from wind and solar. And that number actually varies a lot, will vary a lot as we get more and more wind and solar. Sometimes it's negative, meaning we've got a surplus. So the idea that something just is on all the time only works if you've got then some more source of that, some more uses of that energy at the moment when it's operating.
And Mr. Dyke, your view on so I was hoping that Professor Bell might give us a percentage, but he's avoided doing that. Are you able to do so?
No, because we don't really, we're quite technology agnostic, so we understand the need for flexibility in the market. We understand that the market needs to provide low carbon generation. With regards to putting a number on any of the technologies, that's not something we do. Ultimately, it's about the markets to determine what's the right answer, and therefore ensuring the markets are designed so they're incentivized to bring the right technologies forward. From my perspective as a system operator, I'd like to see a blend of technologies because it allows you to cover for all eventualities on the network. That's certainly what I would.
Right, so how much nuclear does that require to have the right blend to ensure that we're getting electricity out at the right price, or the price that consumers are comfortable with, and maintaining security of supply?
So I think it's less about a number, it's more about exactly what Keith says, the flexibility. It's the flexibility you need from the generation source, and what that's made up from, that's the key bit. We're moving from a world whereby traditionally you matched supply to the demand. And the demand you could pretty much take today's demand and know what tomorrow's is going to do, what next is. But with the various in technology regards embedded wind, embedded solar, the demand changes now more than it ever has done in the past. You've also got consumer behaviour as well, which is changing electric vehicles, when they charge, for example. So you're trying to balance both sides of the equation now, whereas historically you're only looking to balance on the one side. So for us, it's all about flexibility. Flexibility in the generation mix is key, as opposed to what's the absolute number. If you look forward in our future energy scenarios, I think, if I remember rightly, in the sort of mid to late 30s, you're probably going to need 160, 180 gigawatts of available capacity in the market in order to meet the needs. And that will be made up of renewable generation. It will also be made up of flexible generation as well.
Okay, and we've heard that renewables are a very important component because it meets zero carbon. It's also, the price has fallen very substantially. But is there a danger that if we worry too much about price, that we're not going to have enough resilience in the system? So we could go entirely renewables, wind or solar, but we wouldn't know that, we couldn't be confident that we'll have a maintained supply. So where does that balance occur?
Yeah, so I think for us, there are three key elements that we think about. So the future electricity system must be secure. So it must be able to provide supply on those days where the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. So on those days, you need that clean, non-weather related technology in order to make it secure. It must be operable as well. So we, as a system operator, must be able to take the energy from where it's produced to where it's needed in the right way. And also it's got to be affordable and fair as well. So the market design and the whole network design, network strategy, both two elements have to join together in order to come up with the least cost solution for consumers.
Right, and so we haven't defined what proportion should be generated by different sources. Does that mean that that lack of certainty, so we can't say to nuclear we're going to need this, and biomass we're going to need that, or wind, solar we're going to need. So does that mean that the supply chains aren't available to meet that demand because we haven't yet told them what it is?
I think that's a fair point. I think there is a need for, there's a lot of talk now about a strategic energy plan and moreover a strategic spatial energy plan that takes account of locations. It's sort of put some pivots in place around which the market can move in order to deliver most cost effectively. And that plan has to be take account of risk. So it must deliver a sufficiently resilient system. You're quite right, I think, to raise that. There will be things that we can get going with right now and already are being invested in. So, for example, success in the next auction round for CFDs is going to be really important to show that sort of pathway for variable renewables in particular. And we need to kind of keep some options open in terms of the rest of the mix, as Craig was describing. But at some point, as you implied, we do need to narrow down in order that the market has confidence to deliver. But part of that plan must also, I think, take account of the risk that the market won't deliver on certain technologies, might be overpriced, overcost, or delayed, while still delivering a sufficiently resilient supply that takes account of the variability of weather and kind of what's happening in
right, so we need to maintain some flexibility in our approach because we can't be that confident about the future.
So we have to be clear enough about what needs to be developed in order that the market gets on and delivers it, because they haven't got very long. There's a whole the rest of the economy, in a sense, in terms of the decarbonisation pathways, depends on electricity sector being decarbonised. So delays or failures to decarbonise there have an impact elsewhere. Our ability to comply with the 6th carbon budget, for example, and the 2030 nationally determined contribution. So we have to get the electricity system right. It's not very long. We have to get on with what we can get on with now and recognise what else we need. For example, the use of hydrogen to provide that resilience, and what does that depend on? Which depends on the ability to make, not just to make hydrogen at scale, low carbon hydrogen, also the ability to store it, and what are the commercial kind of incentives for anybody to come in and deliver all of those facilities and the associated infrastructure. So we really need, I think, clarity on a plan that takes account of risk in the right sort of way, but also clarity on the commercial mechanisms to deliver these key components and get the basic facilities away now.
I'm sure we'll come on to that, but Derek Thomas.
Yeah, thank you for that. In terms of, and for you, Professor Key, speeding up deployment of the low carbon energy technologies, what could the government do? What more could the government do to support out the rollout of these technologies? Not necessarily talk about financial intervention. What other kind of environment does the government need to do to support accelerating deployment?
I think one of the key things is establishing a market for the product or for the service. So we just mentioned hydrogen. Low carbon hydrogen has to be defined in the right way to encourage investment in producing it, storing it, using it. But that also has to be done in a way that doesn't unduly tilt the balance too far towards hydrogen. So, for example, decarbonisation of manufacturing or industrial processes. A lot of that actually should be done through electrification. Just when you look at the kind of cost of the technologies and what's available to be used. Whereas what I understand is that the way that things are incentivised right now, there are some parties that are looking towards using low carbon hydrogen because of the significant subsidy that's available there. So it's not a level playing field. So while these kind of commercial mechanisms need to be put in place, they need to be put in place having in mind all of the energy vectors and what's the right mix between them, not on a kind of vector by vector isolated basis.
So can I pick up on the hydrogen bit? There's kind of a conversation about whether it should be used for heating homes, or for transport, or for storage. Where would you sit on those things? Do you think the time is right to invest in it even more so in the hydrogen transport and storage infrastructure? Is that where the pressure is really needed?
So what our work in the CCC reveals is that there is a need for hydrogen. The question, as you imply, when hear all sorts of different parties, is about how much of it. So I'm sceptical about the extent to which hydrogen really is the right answer in terms of heating in homes. I think, if you're producing electricity, just use it as electricity and you make use of the heat pumps rather than the kind of energy conversion disbenefits you get from making hydrogen and then storing it and then burning it and so on and so forth. And there's a whole kind of specific infrastructure that would need to be sat around it. But our analysis suggests that there is a certain, a significant quantity of low carbon hydrogen that we will need at the very least for the electricity sector, for all the reasons we were just talking about, and very likely, I think, for parts of the transport sector where basically batteries are too heavy for sort of, aviation, shipping, potentially heavy goods vehicles, this sort of thing. So there's a whole other kind of set of challenges there about getting the right sort of infrastructure to get those fuels in place, those low carbon fuels that looks at this stage likely to be based upon hydrogen.
Yeah, so the right technology in the right place. In terms of the conditions, are the conditions now in place for large scale, long duration energy storage to be built? Is everything right for that now, or is there more the government needs to do?
No, I don't think it is right for that now. I welcome the government consulting on it. I think they produced the consultation paper just before Christmas that starts to recognise the need for large-scale, long-duration energy storage. Of course, there's a whole kind of debate we should have about how long is long in terms of the duration. The minimum end 6 hours, but we need to go a lot longer than that. The key point, I think, being that we need that kind of capacity of the scale of terawatt hours. And you can look at different models and how many terawatt hours, you can have some discussion about it. But the duration, how long you might be leaving the energy in the store for, we're talking weeks, months, potentially years, to deal with these kind of quite rare, the Dunkelflaute type of circumstances. And the commercial model for that is quite difficult. If you're making money as a developer of an energy store out of buying the energy when it's really cheap and selling it back into the market when the market price is high, of course you make more money the more times you cycle the energy through the store. But if you're just going to have a store and leave it there for years, you haven't got the opportunity to do that, as well as having a very high capital cost for the store. So I think we do need that sort of scale of storage to be developed and get underway very soon for 2030, 2035, that sort of time frame. And we need the right kind of commercial mechanism to encourage its construction and operation.
So then moving on from storage to the demand side, are the conditions now in place for demand side response to become a major part of the energy system? It's the big kind of conundrum for...
Well, I think Craig's already got some experience of that already.
Let me come on. So if you go back a winter, we're now 23, 24, you go back to winter 22, 23, where it's looking to be really tight because of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Even step back before that, so we've used demand-side response historically for decades now to manage the system. But it's very much driven about industrial and commercial load, and ultimately a lot of the demand provision has been netting off demand with running backup generation as an example. In 22-23 we launched what was, and still is, the Demand Flexibility Service, and that's where we work really closely with big suppliers and the small suppliers to actually access demand at a consumer level, so right down to domestic house level for those with smart meters. And what we've seen is actual significant growth in that market from a couple of hundred megawatts to this year, I think we're at 500-600 megawatts. So just in the space of a year. And we're also seeing real big consumer engagement as well. But what's the real, win in this as well is the way that suppliers are actually engaged and are developing their own products to compete in order to grab that little bit of demand into their supply chain in order to incentivize cheaper electricity for themselves, but also something for the consumer. The bit for us now is how do we turn what was in there ultimately a security supply type service into something that's more enduring, so people can engage more frequently, whether it be electric vehicles or heat pumps. So something is happening today, and it's first in the world stuff actually.
So what drove that kind of quite stark acceleration, which is what I'm pressing on? Was that the hike in the energy price, and have we kind of are we unlikely to see that continued investment in the domestic?
Yeah, so it was less about the price. It was more about, as we went into the winter preceding this, it was more about how do we ensure that we weren't overly reliant on gas, knowing what could happen if the pipes were sort of cut off in Russia, so to speak. But what happened because of that urgency, Ofgem, government, ourselves, and industry really accelerated that development of consumer level demand quite quickly in the space of what would normally take 6 to 12 months for it to develop or incrementally change the service. We developed it all within the space of 3 to 4 months with industry, and then rolled it out and actually saw the returns pretty quickly. So I think there's a broad need around it. Can demand flexibility work? So you've got supply and demand flexing. Yes, I think that's been absolutely proven. The other bit for that is actually when government, ourselves, the regulator and industry work together quickly with a real sharp focus, things can happen quite quickly, and that's really important as well, as much as anything.
Yeah. So we've seen that with lots of examples. But is there a danger that we drop back into things are a bit more stable, a bit more safe, and then we don't continue that level of drive? Or do you think there's a quick win that is sustainable now?
So part of what we're looking at now is how do we turn it from what is effectively an out-of-market solution? So we use it and access it in order to maintain security supply. Is how do we turn it into an enduring solution? So we're doing some work now with industry and with Ofgem and with government to work out how we turn from a security supply only product into a commercial product that allows actors to come in and participate as and when they want, as opposed to when it's just the system operators need. And that's the ultimate thing as well. It's giving the consumer choice so they can participate when they want to participate, as much as when the system operator may need them.
I wonder if I could come in on the demand side thing. I mean, the flexible demand has almost been like the holy grail for energy system economists forever. I think we finally got the pieces starting to come together, some of what Craig has been talking about. But I think, crucially, there's the ability to measure the use of energy in different periods of time so that there can be a response and a reward for the different time of use signals. So that, the reason why one of the reasons why it's so important is, of course, the variability of demand relative to the availability of the energy. So we want the electricity to be used when it's windy, when it's sunny. We want electricity use to flex and move through time according to that. So we have to measure on a half-hourly basis so that, okay, you're using it now in response to the fact that it's really cheap because it's windy now, and not using it at another time. So half-hourly metering across the entire market, not just industrial and commercial, but also residential, really important part of it. And it's also got to be easy and worthwhile doing for the consumer. So with electric vehicles, if they're plugged in, gives an enormous amount of flexibility and doesn't impact adversely on the consumer at all, just as an example.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks.
Okay, let's move on to Lloyd just some more.
Thank you very much. I mean, just on the flexibility point, surely it has to affect the consumer to some extent. That's why there's a price differential. Consumers choose to get the bonus by making their life more awkward, or they choose not to. Otherwise, there would be no price differential. I would just put on the energy when I want it, not when it's needed.
The key, I think, is that it shouldn't be as awkward as all of that. I mean, it's true that, if you want to use electricity to do your cooking, or you've got whatever industrial process that
your heating
has to
like
run at a certain time, absolutely.
When you want it, not when the electricity...
Exactly. If it's cold outside, you want to put the heating on, of course. So I'm sceptical of the extent to which we can get a lot of this flexibility. I'm not sure just what proportion of the total demand will be flexible. I know you're speaking to Rob Gross later on. I know he's sort of sceptical about this as well. But I think there still is significant potential. And, if you've got well-insulated homes, you can switch off the heat pump for, an hour or two, and it doesn't have a big impact. Yeah. But certainly with electric vehicles, what is it? The average car today, okay, you can hide a lot with averages, spends 95% of its time parked. So if it's parked in a place that's got access to a charge point and it's plugged in, then, because you very rarely need to have a complete recharge of the battery. It's not always completely depleted. There's an enormous amount of flexibility in when that charging takes place. And then the trick then is you have the software provided by the energy supplier that makes it easy, just sorts it out for you to take advantage of when the energy is cheapest.
Automation.
Yeah, automation. It's still under the control of the user, so you can express preferences and limits and whatever. It doesn't, take over and demand that you switch off the telly when the Gooners are in the Champions League final or whatever. So there has to be some kind of limits on it, but the idea is to make it as easy as possible, and then it doesn't have to be awkward. Of course, there are limits as well to who can really take advantage of it at what time. So this has to be done in an equitable way as well. But there are definitely useful opportunities, I think.
And is there maybe opportunities to collectivise this rather than individualise this? At the moment, if you're in a nice big house and you can afford some battery technology, you'll be able to live your life without any inconvenience and get the benefit. But if you are in a small little flat with no space whatsoever, with no roof, with no nothing, and you're cash poor, but is there opportunity to collectivise this in small groups, communities, so that people can generally benefit from some of these things?
Absolutely, and but you touch on something that's fundamental there about just the quality of the housing stock, and that makes a big difference to the affordability of energy and the quality of the heating system. So, that needs to be got right. That's that's part of the infrastructure, if you like, of the building fabric and so on. Now, the market, in theory, delivers the collectivisation through a product offered by an energy supplier. Mm-hmm. That's basically what the supplier does by being kind of big enough to operate in the wholesale market on behalf of their customers. And a successful supplier will offer an attractive product, an easy-to-use product, to their customers, and they will do kind of, in a way, do the collectivisation of build up the kind of the critical mass of energy users that they can then get a good price in the wholesale market and pass it back through to their customers.
Although most energy providers just provide one flat rate at the moment, and there is no
yeah. So I mean,
that's all a bit of a.
You're right. I mean, the whole kind of retail market is a whole point of discussion, and it's not in a good state. And the sort of things that Craig was talking about earlier have taken too long to develop, really. But yeah.
I mean, we should talk about. I mean, there are suppliers out there are really innovative in this space with really sort of leading edge tariffs. I know for myself, I've got a tariff with I won't name a supplier, which if I charge between 11:30 at night and 5:30 in the morning, it costs me less than 3 pence a mile to charge my car. And there are others out there now, such as the ability to actually get paid if you are willing to discharge your car back into the system. So there are novelty tariffs out there which are working.
Which the majority of people will never have access to.
Agree.
Because they'll park their car on the street and they'll be paying a huge premium for a street charger, and they don't have garage. So rich people will benefit from this.
Agree, and this is the point that no one should be left behind part of these. So these tariffs need to work for all, to your point, not just for those who have the money. Agree.
Craig, what influence do you expect the strategic spatial energy plan to have on the future investments in the grid and storage areas?
So it should set out a completely holistic plan, but at the spatial level, which determines where generation and demand is best sited. So that's ultimately what it's all about. It's about ensuring that generation knows where to connect, demand knows where to connect, but also you're minimising the network investment as well. But also it should be looking across vector as well. So it shouldn't just be about electricity. It should be a whole energy system looking across electricity, gas, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage. And then that gives you the optimised plan there and ultimately delivers your best route to get to net zero, but also should be the cheapest route to net zero for consumers as well.
Sounds all nice, but who's responsible? Who gets it when that's not delivered, and who gets rewarded when it is delivered? I mean, in your evidence, you talked about strategic accountability to assigned bodies. Do you have any more meat on the bones of who those assigned bodies are and how that accountability is held, or is that something you could provide us?
No, so from Nick Wynn's report, SPES recommended that the future system operator should be the party that picks up the strategic spatial energy plan. Mm-hmm. That decision is still yet to be made and is still with government, so we're still waiting for government to make that decision. Once that decision is made, we'll understand, whoever the party is will understand the scope of what it will look like, but also the timescales needed in order to deliver it. And that should also ultimately lead to, exactly to your question, who the right bodies and parties are in order to deliver the plan.
The future service operator should be holding the main responsibility, and that then should be given to other bodies underneath it, effectively, to deliver.
It looks like it, yes. Yeah. That's how it's looking, and you're absolutely right to raise the question. The delivery of the plan, there's a lot resting on this plan, and I'm quite encouraged that there is a kind of bit of momentum behind it. If it's done well.
Is it moving quick enough?
Very good question. There's a lot to it. It's very difficult to do. Government seems to be taking quite a while to come up with this clarity, as we've just been talking about clarifying exactly what the NESO will be doing, how that relates to government's own role in this, Ofgem's role, and then how will all this be delivered. It's all very well to come up with a plan, but how would it be implemented? How will the market deliver?
When would you like this plan to be delivered by?
So the plan to be published, I mean, what's been suggested from your colleagues, maybe
well,
by...
I don't know, because ultimately the timescale will be determined by when government want it. So it's ultimately the government need to advise who's going to do this.
I get that when it will be delivered will be down to government. What I mean is,
When would we like it to be delivered?
When do you think it needs? I mean,
As soon as possible.
As soon as possible. That kind of. Is there a realistic time that it should be delivered by?
I expect that a first cut should be possible in the next 6 to 12 months. That probably wouldn't be able to get into a lot of the sort of spatial detail that ultimately we would like. But I would hope that by doing so as a first iteration, it would give some clarity about the nature of it.
So we need to push government to say within 6 to 12 months, the first draft needs to be here.
My own opinion.
Could I just ask, what's the downside if it's not available within a reasonable period of time? What would be the consequences for the decarbonisation plans that we've set?
That's a good question, and I think one of the issues is about planning, actually, and consenting. So the first thing that anyone who doesn't want something to be built, in their neighbourhood will say is, well, why do you need it? We hear this up in the north of Scotland, for example, where the locals are saying, well, okay, it's to accommodate a wind farm, I get that, but why does the wind farm have to be here, and why couldn't it be somewhere else? So I think certainly this is what I believe was in Nick Windsor's mind in publishing his report last year, was that if there is a clear, credible, concise, holistic idea of, all right, these are all the pieces and these are how they fit together best, all things considered, and that is, fully supported by our elected representatives in government, then one would like to think that sets out the need case and starts to get some of this process moving and get the construction actually underway.
Let's go to Vicky.
I've got so many questions I almost don't want to start. Know where to start. But I'm going to start with gas. Okay, given that in COP, we and countries all over the world signed up that we're going to transition away from fossil fuels. How is it compatible with that commitment, with our commitment to decarbonise power, with our commitment to net zero, to keep unabated gas power stations going until 2035?
So the first thing, of course, is, as you are implying, we need to use as little unabated gas as possible.
Yeah.
There is, of course, a transition of the whole infrastructure we've got to go through, as we were just talking about. However, we do also need reliable supplies of electricity.
Yeah, I understand that. Okay.
So the potential reason for keeping unabated gas plant available is for the cases where you need it for security of supply. So the volume of energy on an annual basis should be very small. So it's like your kind of least bad way of ensuring security of energy supply. So there's a cost of maintaining that infrastructure associated with it. So by 2030, 2035, we may well still have some number of gigawatts of unabated gas capacity, but we should not be
less
having...
less than 5% of our use, or what do you think?
Well, in terms of energy use, it should be no more than 2 or 3%.
2 or 3%, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but on Dunkelflatter days, higher.
Exactly. So it's that kind of, insurance policy almost.
Given that it feels like if you were having to upgrade a gas power station or do work on it, it would feel like you were throwing good money after bad, because eventually these things are going to go. Is there going to be a need to have to upgrade or invest in any of these in order to keep them going?
So I'm not expert enough on quite how the kind of degradation of the plant and the maintenance and the lifetime will go if you're using it less. Although, on the other hand, if we're using it less, it may be ramping up and down a lot more of the existing plants. So quite what that means for its lifetime, I'm not quite sure. And
You're
as you
not sure
imply,
if any interventions
some refurbishment might well be necessary. But also, we need to take account of what comes instead of it and the looking ahead of new gas plant that should be, for example, hydrogen ready and or CCS
You're leading
ready.
me into my next question. Is it possible to convert all of our existing gas power stations into either hydrogen or gas plus CCS?
In terms of hydrogen, I don't know.
Craig,
in
do you
terms
know?
of CCS, I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm aware that there is a new CCGT that's just been awarded a contract in the capacity market, which will start as unabated
That's
gas,
new.
but has Parr's got the ability to convert to hydrogen. Existing fleet, I'm unaware whether existing fleet could, I imagine on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, I'd be really interested to know if that's possible. Now, given that we want the gas that's going into, but given that we want to have as low gas as possible, and we want that gas to have as low carbon emissions as possible, and given that producers from gas all across the world signed up that they would stop venting and flaring, how important is it that we stop venting and flaring in our own North Sea?
Very.
And are you convinced 100? You know, I just might have worked with Alok Sharma to table that amendment on venting and flaring, and might be one of the few members of this Parliament who's actually ever been offshore to see an offshore oil and gas ring. How convinced are you that all of our North Sea is going to have zero venting and flaring by 2030 and meet that international commitment?
Not very convinced at this stage. Certainly, I'm aware of some discussion that colleagues in the CCC have had with parts of the industry where there's a difference of opinion, so we're being told, about what is practicable by 2030. So
I don't want to put words into your mouth, but are you about to say something? It would be very interesting if this committee could recommend the government produce a platform by platform, installation by installation report on how they are going to meet that 2030.
That would be very interesting
commitment.
to see.
Could you just recommend that we might recommend that?
I would recommend close attention to how platform by platform the North Sea gas industry might reduce its emissions.
Might or will, because they've committed to 2030.
That's a good clarification.
Zero
will.
venting and
I'll be very interested to see how they will do it.
Venting and flaring.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I think that would be very helpful. Now, you just spoke about electric cars, okay,
Yes.
and how important they are to managing demand. One of my bugbears is if you live in a big house with a drive, and when you charge your car on a drive from your home electricity, you pay 5% VAT. If you live in one of my terrace houses and you have to use a commercial charger, you pay 20% VAT, okay? This doesn't feel like levelling up.
Correct.
You know, how many hours to the budget now? How many hours to the budget? If the Chancellor doesn't announce a levelling up of what I call ending the pavement tax in this budget, will you be looking at this impact of what I'd call this drag on EV demand from those terraced houses as part of your work? And what's your view on it?
Yes, absolutely. Access to reasonable cost electric vehicle charging for those who don't have a driveway is absolutely essential. Yeah, we've got to address that. I mean, you know, question over here was kind of hinting at that as well. It's, you know, it's part of the infrastructure to enable the energy transition, and it's got to be priced fairly. It's got to be developed, you know, at pace. It's got to be well maintained as well. You've heard various stories about some of the commercial EV chargers not always being in service when you get there and all this sort of thing. So now, can we leave all of this entirely to the market to sort out? I don't know, but any kind of imbalances such as you're suggesting would appear to be, you know, not very helpful.
I mean, I would like to say some terrace houses, it's relatively easy to park outside your own front door every day. Others, where you have Rose Park, it's less easy. That's cause not effect. But are you saying that one of the recommendations that we might want to consider is how do you have not just more chargers, but more reliable chargers, making sure the charging system interoperable, so it's relatively easy to use one brand versus another brand, that they're well maintained, etc.
That all sounds good to me.
Thank you. I'm always focused on the recommendations. Now, I want to quickly talk about burning wood. It's not on my list of questions, but rather topical is the issue of dracs. Okay, so how compatible is it with our net zero emissions to be burning wood that comes from the other side of the Atlantic in great big ships?
So I'm personally not on top of the latest evidence we've been assured in the past that, on balance, all things considered, this was a sustainable resource. Of course, things seem to have come to light in more recent times, suggesting that it's not. But I'm not going to commit to saying anything definitive on that, other than to express concern. And I think, one thing we have said from the CCC is that, well, in the next, say, 5 years, any large-scale support of biomass for the generation of electricity, there must be a clear move towards the capture of the CO2 emissions associated with that, so that we really do get a sustainable BECCS sector going, if we're going to support bioenergy for electricity at all.
When Drax came in here, they sort of tried to say that it doesn't really matter, because every time they cut down a great big tree, they plant a little tiny sapling. And so it's all going to eventually be carbon neutral. Now, that's clearly not the case, isn't it?
As I say, I'm not familiar with the latest evidence.
It may not be, but they also tried to make a case, which was that they're not cutting down great big trees, they're removing brushwood from forests, they're enabling fire breaks to be made to stop forest fires, and that all of that spare wood is a valuable source. I mean, I know you may not be an expert, but you are a member of the Climate Change Committee. Could you agree that if you were taking away that wood, which could be a fire risk, and we want to stop forest fires, then that would be a sensible thing to do, in principle?
In principle, this is all part of kind of rational, sustainable management of forests and of woodland, and whatever. I mean, there's a whole kind of stage, as I understand it, of sort of processing of whatever the product is that you're taking, how you're moving it around, how you're using it. So if all of that together still works out that the net balance of emissions is that you are removing in terms of the woodland management, then it would appear to be okay. Yeah. I'm putting lots of caveats
devil
there,
in the
but
detail, is it?
The devil is in the detail, I think. Yeah, and this is why I'm afraid I'm not the right person.
As I said, I was only meant to be asking about gas power stations, but I've gone on to a few other areas. Very, very interesting and helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky, and may I say thank you to our witnesses for contributing to our inquiry. We're going to suspend the session for just a moment or two in between the two panels. Thank you very much, gents.
Thank you very much.
Meeting is currently suspended. The proceeding 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 is currently suspended.
Thank you. This is the second part of our session on the future energy system. I wonder if each of our witnesses might just tell us who they are and the organisation they represent. Mr. Ambler.
Tim Ambler, the Adam Smith Institute.
I'm Rob Gross, I'm Director of the UK Energy Research Centre.
I'm Doug Parr, I'm Policy Director at Greenpeace UK.
And Jim Watson, Director of the Institute for Sustainable Resources at UCL.
Thank you. I'll make a quick point which I know Vicky would want us to make, which is that we've had 6 witnesses today, all of whom have been gentlemen, and we really would urge the industry when it brings witnesses before this committee to really see whether some greater sense of diversity can be provided. The points on the record. Gentlemen, may I ask you, each of you listened to the first session. Does the government's current approach strike the right balance between the emerging technologies that we know are becoming available and retaining flexibility in order to give us a long-term supply? So, Mr. Ambler, if you could give us your thoughts on that topic, please.
It's quite simple, no.
Okay, and perhaps elaborate.
Right.
Would you elaborate?
I've got my aid memoir notes for myself here. But I thought, and I wasn't aware of the time problem, it might be helpful for anybody who wants to see what I would have said if I'd been allowed to say it.
And you summarise, sir, your views?
Yes, would you like a copy of
it?
Well,
absolutely, yes, if you share that with the committee. But it just gives a quick summary of where you see this.
Right. The Department of Energy Security and Net Zero has 4,217 civil servants who should be capable of simple arithmetic, but appear not to be. What we've done in our team of 5 people, rather less than 4,217, our 5 people have done what the government should have done, is to publish a plan of what the energy market would look like in the year 2050, and that's what we understood this inquiry to be about. And basically, wind and other renewables have to take the prize as the most important source, and much of that is new, although not that new. And so our analysis started with saying, how much can the renewables supply? And the answer is somewhere between 40 and 50%. It's nothing like as much as some people would have us believe.
So your case is that the government's overstating the amount of our energy sources.
The government's not stating anything because they haven't done a plan.
All right. Okay. If I may turn to Professor Gross, please.
So I think that the government is beginning to get some things right. So I think it's laudable. There's been a really clear pivot towards the recognition that the system infrastructure in particular needs to be planned. So the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan is a welcome development. We're clearly no longer in a kind of world where we can be technology neutral and the government can leave everything to the market. That ship's completely sailed. We're in a transition phase where we're trying to build out renewables. But you've already heard about some of the things that are being done less well. In particular, the government's falling behind on heat system decarbonisation. And to jump to the good bit, we can't take gas off the bars until we have enough flexibility provision from other sources. That certainly is unlikely to happen for 2030, even by 2035. And so therefore we need to be thinking about the extent to which gas is a strategic reserve and needs to be kept operable until no longer needed. I'll pause in the colleagues.
So the question on balance. There are certainly some things that are going well, but there are a few things that aren't going so well. So there needs to be a considerable emphasis on the delivery of offshore wind, onshore wind and solar, and with the associated grid infrastructure that is needed to transmit it from the places where it is generated to where it is needed. That's a delivery thing where the government needs to be de-risking the investment as far as possible. There's an innovation space, and the two I would point to are around storage, particularly long-term storage and in demand-side response, where they need to be looking to free up and reduce regulation to allow to give opportunities for technologies to come through, and in certain cases driving innovation through funding. And there's a third area where there is clearly overemphasis compared to what is required. We believe we should be aiming for a 100% renewables system, and I can't for the life of me see why the government is so enthusiastic about nuclear, given the product is so rubbish, long term and over expensive, and also carbon capture and storage. We will certainly need some carbon capture and storage, but as you will tell by a brief glance at me, I'm not in the first flush of youth. I was talking about carbon capture and storage in the late 90s. We are now probably closer to net zero time in 2050 than when we were first having conversations about its significance. It has delivered globally very little. And I think to put an overemphasis on that as a key part of the overall answer seems to me extremely optimistic.
Okay, we've got emerging differing views already. So, and Professor Watson.
Yeah, I mean, I just add to what certainly Doug and Rob have said. Broadly, some things are going in the right direction. We are making a lot of progress. I think looking at governments, for example, their energy security policy statements over the last couple of years, I think if anything, they're focusing on the supply side on too many long-term options and not enough on the short-term options. So I'd like to see them doubling down on the wind, the offshore wind and the solar, of course with the battery storage and all the flexibility you need to go with it, as you discussed with the previous panel. I think there's a temptation to sort of fund, nuclear, hydrogen, things that are going to deliver in the 2030s onwards, but we really need to accelerate the stuff that's going to keep delivering now. And then the other thing I'd add is the demand side. I think government is not doing anywhere near enough on the energy efficiency agenda. I know that's not necessarily in the scope of this inquiry, but I really think you have to, if you're going to have a strategy for the future of electricity or energy as a whole, energy demand has to be at the centre of it, and it has to be the first thing you address.
A holistic approach. Lloyd Russell-Moore.
How would the government improve how it coordinates policy on decarbonising energy for electricity, heat and transport? So that's effectively following on from the question that you had. What does the government need to do?
I think you talked again to the last panel about this. One thing I'd say, there's lots of things the government needs to do, but the thing I'd really emphasise is making that decision on heat, allied to upgrading our housing stock. So it's upgrading the housing stock, which of course is happening, especially for some low-income homes under current schemes, but the scale is not enough. The government has really missed an opportunity with the energy crisis of the last couple of years to scale that up, and then link that to a decision on heat. I think. What savings does that actually achieve for us in terms of demand? In terms of overall demand, the Energy Demand Consortium, a research consortium in the UK, has done scenarios of up to 50% reduction in demand, which is quite eye-watering over the period to 2050. I'm personally a little sceptical you can get that far, but certainly, within the 25% region. So they've done a lot of analysis looking across the economy of the kind of reduction that could be delivered. And if I know that's not this inquiry, but we have another inquiry on the same topic, so it's useful to get the wider bits of discussion. For the ordinary person, what does that actually entail, them having to do at the moment, and what should they have to do in the future? Personally, I wouldn't put it quite like that in terms of an ordinary person having to do something. At the moment, an ordinary person has to try and find a supplier, try and find a bid stream that they might or might not get. Yeah. They'll probably not find a supplier that matches up with government money, and they'll probably give up. Yep. Or if they're wealthy enough, they'll pay for it out of their own money. Exactly. And most people will do nothing. So that's what the ordinary person does at the moment, and we have no progress. So why I meant it from the ordinary person, I meant is, what are the barriers to achieving it's that? It's information, it's access to the right skilled people. Clearly, for most people, it's access to money, to upgrade your home and invest in a new heating system. And, that was the point I was going to make. The government ought to say electric heating is the lead option now. We're not going to keep pretending it's a choice on a national level between that and hydrogen, because all the evidence is electricity is probably the front runner. But there are examples from France to Ireland to other countries where you've got really good, actively well-funded agencies that can help people through that journey, identifying suppliers, even project managing upgrades of their home, and doing all the things they need. Because at the moment, it's a very, very difficult thing to navigate for most households. Doug and Robert, we'll go back very quickly.
I concur with that. Our model of how we go about reducing gas use in the majority of homes is to hope that every homeowner is going to make themselves an expert in the energy system and on energy technologies. Now, we have proposed a Warm Homes Agency, which does a number of things, but it includes independent advice and support and redress where necessary, where poor workmanship has been delivered, so that there is something that looks like a decent consumer journey. That agency could also be staffed by people who really know the industry and know what's going on and help with the skills build out that is going to be necessary to make sure that there is enough in the supply chain of people who are able to do the job and as I say, deal with poor workmanship, or give confidence to people that there is going to be poor workmanship. We see where there is a kind of more structured approach to being able to deliver efficiency and changes in heating system, as there are through local authorities and large social housing providers, then they can take those decisions and deliver it. But individual homeowners, it's much more challenging.
Mm-hmm. Robert, I mean, there's this area. Do we need a similar kind of approach in all areas where you have agencies that are specialised, focusing on the rollout, if we're looking at transport, if we're looking at home ownership, or how does the government deliver that change?
I do think there's a particular case for this kind of agency or information providing central body for home energy efficiency because of the multiple market barriers and obstacles and information gaps. I don't think it's the same, actually, no, at all.
So what government intervention do we need in other areas of the market to make it work?
If you're talking about, so what we're talking about is electrifying the 2/3 of final energy use that we currently get from burning stuff. So that's burning gas in our houses, that's burning petroleum products in our cars. I don't think it's feasible to be able to electrify those 2/3 of energy services if electricity itself isn't sufficiently affordable. So you've touched upon some of the issues around what percentage VAT you might pay for electric vehicle charging. If you stop at a motorway service station and you don't have a Tesla, you can pay anything in a range of about 50 to nearly 90p per kilowatt hour for a fast charger. That's far too expensive. That makes running an electric car as expensive or more expensive than running a car on premium petrol. And so I think there needs to be, we have a huge strategic opportunity to deliver affordable electricity using our resources in the North Sea in particular, and by ensuring that we get this build out of low carbon generation delivered at the lowest possible cost and at the lowest possible cost of money, so low possible rate of interest. And I think that has to be the major strategic objective for the government if we're going to do this decarbonisation and electrification journey. So that is a fundamental prerequisite and it's overlooked very, very much.
The focus needs to be bringing the price down of. And Tim, anything very briefly?
Right. Your committee launched an inquiry yesterday on this very subject, to which we will be responding. But in a nutshell, for now, the answer is privatisation. The energy market has never been privatised yet, although there's been much talk of it, and electricity not in particular. And we will be putting forward answers to your questions as part of that inquiry.
That seems to be completely opposite of where we are going, the future service operator coming back in-house.
Isn't that? Yes, and it is.
Because privatisation.
Unsurprisingly,
I will interestingly read the paper when you send it.
Unsurprisingly, this government is entirely wrong, as it is on quite a lot of things. And why I recommend that you read my notes, which you won't get a chance to hear. But in a nutshell, Greenpeace is completely wrong that nuclear is some sort of fad. It is an essential part. There are three parts. In 2050, there are three sources of energy or electricity. The main one, we agree, is renewables, between 40 and 50%. Because, amazing as Greenpeace will discover, the wind does not always blow, nor does the sun always shine. And therefore you need high nuclear to about 30%, and you need fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage. And the government is exceedingly slow on both of those things. Now, given the fact that both of those things are absolutely crucial to having net zero 2050. It is astonishing that they would spend their time fussing about how the odds and ends, and I accept that the price of charging your car on the forecourt is important. But compared to those strategic issues, they're not important. And those are the three things that really matter.
Okay, thank you. Let's go on to Vicky Ford.
So in this journey towards getting less from burning, more from wind blowing, nuclear, etc., what new energy security vulnerabilities will we have, and what does the government need to be doing now to address those? Robert?
So the new vulnerabilities will be around the kind of variability of renewables. We will continue to be exposed to gas price volatility, so we shouldn't separate physical security from economic security, in my view, for as long as we need to burn gas in order to keep our system reliable. And you've heard from previous colleagues that that's likely to be the case for some years to come. The fundamental requirement is that we need new network infrastructure so that we can connect to places where the renewable resource is strongest and where we have the opportunity to do renewables at scale. And that's the thing that we've been falling behind on. So to the extent to which there might be future vulnerabilities, those vulnerabilities will be associated with our inability to deliver the network assets that we need quickly enough.
Always trying to move the power from the power source towards the demand, especially when it comes to renewables. Is the government doing enough to try and encourage the demand to move closer to the supply?
Well, I don't actually think that it's feasible for that to happen because it's windy in the North Sea. There aren't many people that are living there. It's easier to build wind farms.
Necessarily people, but
yeah, so no, I don't think it's possible. I think we need to strategically develop the network. In the same way that we built a network for coal by wire in the 1960s, we need to build a network for wind by wire now.
Jim or Doug?
I just wanted to come in on your security question.
Yeah.
I think Rob has identified some of the risks. There's also a risk with making sure the gas system continues to be secure as we use less and less of it. If people are moving off gas to electric heating, you're using less gas, as Keith was explaining in the first session, for electricity. You're going to still have to have a reliable gas network, and you're going to have to pay for that with fewer customers. And I don't think government's got a strategy yet for how it's going to manage that. How is it going to pay for a network which is in declining use? So that's the second thing I'd add. Third is cyber security and digitalisation. I mean, it's not something people put on record very much for very obvious reasons, but I think as we electrify more and more things and things are connected, cyber security becomes more and more important. Yep. And then the final one is the minerals and critical minerals. I mean, it's not the same as oil and gas security because the minerals get embodied in the technology. It's not something we need as a fuel on an ongoing basis, but we still need to think about the security and how that gets embodied in the products.
So reminding the government they need to be mindful of all of those other risks is something that we could definitely mention in our report. Doug?
I'd try and add to what's already been said. Firstly, recognising that demand is an important part of security as well. Far too much focus is on security through supply and not enough through demand, and that applies to critical minerals as well. We need some infrastructure to start recycling the minerals that we've imported into the UK. Now, on other aspects of sort of reliable electricity supply, these are to some extent matters of choice. We have for the last couple of winters and many previous, when the price has been extremely high, our economic security of the gas system has relied on the storage of gas going on in continental Europe, because we have very little storage here. And so, and we do import quite a bit of electricity almost on a daily basis at the moment, and we're not too exercised about that. I would recommend, however, that the UK does invest in long-term storage for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, as we've been perfectly well aware of for a very long time, as a challenge in the 100% renewable system, and that we can contribute to the global technology push around things like green hydrogen, the flow of that green hydrogen into other sectors, but also like fertilizer, etc., but also into the long-term storage of electricity that we're going to need.
So, clearly, over the past 2 years since Ukraine, we've really understood how insecure our energy supply is. The what's happened with energy prices. Do you think that in a net zero world, our power supply, our energy supply, our electricity supply will feel more secure?
Well, it could do. I mean, it depends on the sort of actions that we've been talking about. How fast do we build out the North Sea? Yeah. How fast do we do grid?
It is an exceptionally good question. The storage of electricity has, in one form or other, batteries or hydrogen or whatever it might be, has been, it's important, but it's been greatly overhyped. And to say that we can rely on the continent, we imported 12% of our energy needs from the continent, if you want a number. The government is my central point. The government is not sufficiently preoccupied with the numbers. They have not done the arithmetic, they have not published the arithmetic, and we need to see the arithmetic, which, if they have, should not be kept secret. Because a lot of the debate we're having this morning depends on the numbers, and if we don't know what the numbers are, it's all fairly meaningless. So we need...
I can see that you're a mathematician, as am I, so let's leave it there and pass on to the next person.
The answer to your question is yes, it will be more secure.
You'll feel more secure.
More stable prices. There'll be a transition. We shouldn't make the kind of presumption that we can get the new, for example, hydrogen in seasonal storage available. If it's not delivered on time, we have an energy security risk. We need to rely on gas, keep the gas system available until we don't need it anymore. But when we reach that destination point, we can absolutely have a more secure and more stable priced energy system.
I can do 2 more minutes.
All right.
3 more minutes.
Well, what I'd like to do then, if I may, is just invite each of you, because we are going to need to conclude in 2 or 3 minutes, just to, are there any issues that you believe we should hear about that you haven't yet told us in your evidence? So, Mr. Ambler, yes, please.
I think regulation is a very important point, be it in the pricing, which we'll come on to in your new inquiry starting now, but also the slowness of nuclear provision is due more than anything else to unnecessary regulation.
Hey, Professor Gross.
I think there's a place for nuclear. I don't think we can expect to get more than 1 or 2 reactors per decade. I think we need to be realistic about that. For me, it's all about timelines and sequencing, and ensuring that we look after the legacy assets infrastructure that we've got for as long as we need it, whilst building the new infrastructure for the net zero future.
Dr. Parr.
As it was touched on in the last question session, I'd like to make a point about biomass.
Yes,
and I do not think that the current model of mass burn of wood can ever be sustainable. The model of trying to get turn something into a commodity, ship it from various places in the world, and have some kind of business-led certification. That was the point Vicky Ford was
making earlier.
Yeah. We've tried it. We've tried it with soya. It failed. We've tried it with palm oil. It failed. We've tried it with fish.
We've got the point. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Professor Watson.
A couple of quick points. One on nuclear. I think the model we're pursuing with Hinkley C and Sizewell C is not really going to deliver very quickly. Clearly, it's deliver very expensive. So I don't mind if the government wants to try the alternative, the small modular reactor approach, but I think we have to be very careful not to believe the estimates how much they're going to cost until we built 1 or 2 or 3. And then on biomass, I agree we need proper sustainability standards, but if we're going to continue to have things like
I'm just going to do a really quick last question, because we've got 2 professors,
okay,
a doctor and a mathematician. You must look at international comparisons.
Yes.
In terms of how's the UK performing versus other countries, would you say we're in the top quartile, bottom quartile, or somewhere in the middle, Jim?
Depends what sector you're talking about.
Oh, just come on. Is the UK on the whole?
I think we're in the middle on average.
In the middle.
CO2 good, spend for the transition poor.
We're definitely in the top quartile for renewables, and we were the leading offshore wind country for a number of years.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was also agreeing with Greenpeace, amazingly, about biomass. The the nuclear future is these SMRs, which were spoken of. Our calculations are that we're going to need 70 SMRs by 2050, which is doable. We explain how, and the government is tentatively ordering one, not 70, one, in 4 years' time. It's pathetic.
Thank you all for your evidence today. I'm afraid I have to say the following. Order, as we're about to become inquirate, I'm going to have to end our formal proceedings.
I'm so sorry.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.